Hello and welcome to our webinar, PCI Compliance and Payment Acceptance Technology, What Law Firms Need to Know. Please take a moment to look at the chat area in the lower right corner of your screen. You will see a drop-down menu with options next to the words Send To. If you have any technical problems today, send a chat message to host. If you have any questions for the presenters, chat to all presenters. And if you have questions or comments to share with the entire audience, send a chat to all participants. A recording of this webcast will be available later today, and we will send all registrants an email tomorrow with the link. Today's sponsor is ClientPay. ClientPay is an award-winning technology solution from Persolvent, a company with a mission to make life easier for professional service firms through innovations in digital payment processing. ClientPay has been acknowledged as an industry leader and helps companies get paid faster and reduce write-offs, all while eliminating billing errors. Today's presenter is Ryan Beck, Vice President of ClientPay. Ryan oversees the strategic growth and development of ClientPay, working closely with professional service firms to implement a solution. An experienced finance industry veteran, Ryan has a proven track record of helping customers make the transition to ClientPay smoothly and easily. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to Ryan, who will now begin. Ryan.
Thank you, Carolyn, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's definitely a hot topic and one we heard just last week from many of you that may be on today's webinar at the ALA C4 conference in Boston. A lot of questions around security, managing that security, and what that would look like for your firm. So following the energy and excitement from last week's conference, we're excited to sponsor today's webinar and really dive into PCI compliance and how it impacts your law firm. So here's our outline for today. We'll walk through, or hopefully the goal is that you'll walk away from this webinar with a better understanding of PCI in general and how it impacts your firm. We'll go through some of the basics of PCI, talk about the important role compliance plays for both your firm and your clients, and with regards to that sensitive data. We'll talk about how payment acceptance and the platforms that you're using impacts your overall PCI, which is a very important component. And finally, we'll show some simple steps that you can take to make sure that you're in compliance and practicing practicing your law firm business securely. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, which we'll dive into. So with further ado, we'll get started here today. So why is security important? I think it goes without saying security is more important than ever. Even just as working in the law firm space, we work with a lot of the AmLaw 200 firms. We've seen more dedicated security people, CSOs, being hired at large law firms just to focus on security, reducing scope of security, making sure policies and procedures are in place. And that's probably on the heels of the 2018 statistics where there were 1,244 data breaches reported across the U.S., which really resulted in 4.4 million sensitive records being exposed. So it's about 14 records per second, which is a staggering number. And most businesses, I think, and law firms in general, think that only big box retailers are targets for that data theft. But in reality, any small or medium business is vulnerable as well. Most of us certainly recall 2014 as being the year of the breach with the Target and Home Depot breaches. I think there were close to 100 million cards impacted through those two breaches. So many of us as consumers were probably part of those breaches and were impacted. So obviously at a much larger scale, but if the vulnerabilities can happen at that level, they certainly can happen at that small and medium business level as well. So let's find out more about PCI and how we can combat those security issues. So what is PCI? We're going to keep it very basic to start. It's short for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. So it really gets down to PCI, so Payment Card Industry, but the DSS sometimes gets dropped off, but it really is Data Security Standard. And it was established back in 2004 by some of the top players, and really now is being overseen by all the card brands. So Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, and JCB created that Security Standards Council, which oversees and enforces all of the PCI across the world. So the PCI standards, they really just add that tighter security and guidance around the ways businesses accept credit cards and how sensitive data is processed, how it's stored, how it's transmitted. The sole goal is to protect merchants from breaches and obviously theft of that cardholder data. No one wants to have card data compromised, and that's really what those standards are in place for. They're used globally, as I had mentioned. They're required by every major credit card provider, and every merchant that is accepting cards needs to be mindful of and understand the security standards that they must adhere to. So if your firm's planning to take credit cards, you are already taking credit cards, PCI compliance certainly needs to be top of mind. So we have a large audience today, which is great. A lot of different roles and responsibilities, I'm sure, at the firms based on who's attending. But the question may be, why should I bother with PCI? My merchant provider handles it, or the software I have handles it. And it really comes down to is PCI is required, and some of those aspects fall on the firm regardless of the system used. And I think that's an important piece. Are you writing down card numbers when a client calls in to give you them over the phone? Are you restricting access to the card processing system? Do contractors have access to any of that information? I know a lot of firms outsource IT work and that type of thing. Are they locked out from being able to access that environment? Do you maintain your own internal network and have antivirus software in place? So there's a lot of things that fall outside of the entry and transmission storage within the card application itself. And really one aspect it's smaller but often overlooked but kind of hits home on this is the keying in of cards and the potential for keystroke malware to be implemented or a malware to be at the firm where it logs and deciphers keystrokes. I mean, there's certainly more to maintaining compliance. Even though you're leveraging a system, there's that internal component, both employee-wise, with physical cards being floating around the firm or emails, and then obviously that internal network as well. And FIME, it's F-I-M-E, has a great book called PCI DSS, Business Enabler, Not Technical Challenge. And really it's the goal of that book, or the kind of the recap of that book or summary of that book, is really that PCI seems like a challenge and daunting task that needs to be overcome. That's not the case. Yes, PCI can be tedious depending on how you're processing, but if you're taking the right approach with the right technology, it can be a rather easy practice to maintain a secure payment acceptance environment. So some of the benefits to maintaining that is obviously protection for both you and your clients, making sure that the firm isn't held accountable for costs if client data is stolen or compromised. If you do experience a breach, being PCI compliant and showing that you have validated your compliance can help you avoid expensive audits and that type of thing. So it really does lessen the blow if something does happen at the firm. You can avoid fines for noncompliance. So, the PCI Council works with all acquiring banks to enforce PCI regulations. That said, we'll get into this on the next slide, but as merchants being level 4 merchants, it's almost kind of an honor system. There's not a lot of focus on making sure that you have someone come in and audit your business, or even just submitting your questionnaires on a monthly basis. But if your firm's caught violating PCI guidelines, you could be fined, a couple $1,000s. I know they say up to $100,000, but that's for rather significant breaches, and really can be devastating for a lot of businesses. And then just maintaining your firm's integrity and reputation. Clients are expecting confidentiality and that you have the most up-to-date systems and are managing their personal information in a secure fashion, and you don't want them to lose trust in your firm. And even those that maybe didn't lose their information, they certainly could still lose trust in your firm. It might help you or prevent you from gaining referrals and new business. So the PCI standards and which ones you need to follow, it really comes down to what level of merchant you are. It really does vary based on how you process, but it also varies based on the number of transactions processed annually. So all companies fall into one of these 4 levels, and obviously the Targets and the Home Depots, I mentioned earlier, are level 1 merchants, run a lot of transactions, access the network a ton of times, have a lot of cards. But even though each level has its own guidelines, law firms really fall into that level 4 merchant. So acquirers can push you into a different category, but most firms are, even though their transaction counts are certainly higher, or ticket sizes are higher than a retail establishment or some e-commerce stores, the number of transactions processed, the number of cards processed, the number of times accessing the network is very low. So generally, law firms are considered very low risk. And this is certainly not meant to scare you or worry you about processing card payments. And as I mentioned, in reality, firms fall into a level 4 status. I think we maybe have a couple, if they do third-party collections, that run more than that. I'd have to check. But as a result, you're considered low risk, and level 4 merchants really have just the self-assessment questionnaire that you need to complete. And each level, obviously, there's more required of you and costs more money, obviously time, resources, QSAs, that type of thing, and have stricter guidelines as a level 1 merchant than a level 4, but it's something to take into consideration as your business grows and number of transactions processed annually. Another thing that impacts the guidelines and that you need to follow is the way you're processing credit card transactions. If you're using a point-of-sale software, like a brick-and-mortar retail store or the desktop terminal, you might have different requirements than those that are entering them through a virtual terminal or having clients enter them in online. So there's different requirements whether you're using System A, System B, System C. And the easier path, and one thing to remember, is how much access do I have to the card data? Are clients leaving them or emailing them to me? Do I have physical copies? Are they calling me and my staff is writing them down and sending them to someone else to transmit, and then they're shredding that information? It's just how much exposure do you have to the card information? And because of that, we've seen more and more firms moving towards accepting payments online through a click-to-pay link they email to a client or putting a link directly on their firm's website. And a major reason for that is that PCI and reducing scope and liability for maintaining that compliance. If clients are entering their own card information in, then your firm is not responsible for processing, storing, seeing, handling, maintaining that sensitive card information. Potentially your firm would never actually see a credit card number again if the clients are doing it on their side. I know we get a lot of questions, and probably we'll have some here at the end as well, where firms would like to recharge a card or leverage a card for future payments. And depending on the system that you're using, even if the client's entering it in initially through an online link that's outside of your firm network and outside of your scope, depending on the system, it can be tokenized and kind of sit in that system saying that client A has a Visa ending in 1111 for you to charge again. So there's different ways to really eliminate, I hate to use the word eliminate, but really eliminate the scope of PCI for your firm and what you would be responsible for. One thing to consider as firms are adding links to your website, if it's something you're considering or already have in place, is whether you're using a redirect, meaning it's client clicks a link and it goes to a secure payment form that's handled by a PCI compliant vendor like, let's say, ClientPay, or you're having a form directly on your website and leveraging an SSL for that. So while SSLs provide some security between websites and browsers, sometimes simply having that SSL isn't enough to establish PCI compliance and really isn't necessary. There's a few different ways you can approach that, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. But really the redirect to the third-party payment page offloads that scope of PCI. You really don't want to have it on your domain if it's not necessary. Sometimes you might have custom forms that you want the look and feel to be a certain way, but in fact, you're adding some complexity to PCI when you're having the information processed within your domain. So redirects work really well, and whether it's solo practice firms or AmLaw 200 firms, we're starting to see in that online usage and the redirects to really eliminate the scope of PCI for firms. So some of the basic steps to keep card information safe. Most firms aren't going to need a qualified security assessor or QSA to come in and audit your firm. Not necessary, again, with a level 4 merchant. Really what they are is they're just an independent company certified by the PCI Council to come in and validate your compliance. Of course, we have to go through the rigorous audit every year to be a level 1 PCI compliant provider. We have someone on site here for a month kind of going through everything. Different set of protocols for a level 4 merchant. Validating your compliance can really be as easy as just completing that self-assessment questionnaire. And if you're not doing so, try to get a network scanning service to check your network, kind of check the virtual doors and windows at your firm to make sure you're not in risk, and it really just identifies external network vulnerabilities, I guess is the best way to put it. So it's a scanning service that, Trustwave, Security Metrics, there's a ton of them out there that you can implement. They're very cost effective. You can buy them on an annual basis. You kind of set it. It sends you monthly, weekly, quarterly reports, whatever you want, and it just gives you kind of green light, everything looks good, or there's a potential vulnerability with this firewall or this environment, and obviously you can take remediation efforts at that point. So scanning services are great. Obviously the antivirus software is important as well, but there's also general guidelines all merchants should follow, which are listed here. Don't write credit card numbers down on receipts or other pieces of paper. Heard a ton of stories over the years of firms keeping credit card information on Post-its and file cabinets or secure Outlook folders, those types of things. Just try to avoid maintaining those numbers at the firm. If you are setting up payment plans for clients, you should have a system that ultimately encrypts and tokenizes that data so it's stored in the secure system. At that point, you really just need, if you are getting a paper payment plan document that you're getting the client to sign, you really just need the last 4 digits, or you can have the first 6 and the last 4 with the middle group blocked out. So that's enough to validate that the payment plan is agreed to if they ever come back and dispute any transactions, but you're not having to keep the full card number at the firm. And again, don't store it, don't use any electronic storage, as I mentioned earlier. Excel spreadsheets, the private Outlook folders, that type of thing. Limiting the number of employees that have access to that data. So a security, having a security policy in place, making sure people adhere to it, very important. Making sure that if you do have a security policy in place, that you go through it every 6 months or 12 months to make sure everyone's up to date. Usually that follows the SAQ questionnaire. The questionnaire is a great guide to make sure, am I doing X? No. Yeah, I'm actually doing Y, so I need to do this, this, and this to make sure I'm compliant. I mentioned the antivirus software, vulnerability scanning, and really just having an electronic system. If you're not using an electronic system today, it's a night and day different. You can audit who's doing what in the system. Again, refunds, credits, voids, sales. It tracks IP, so you can see where payments are coming from. So an electronic payment system is very helpful versus maybe using something that's a little bit older or a desktop terminal that doesn't provide a lot of value when it comes to the compliance side. So, and we've certainly created white papers, and you can go to our website, and on the resources page there's a ton of information on being compliant, what that looks like. If you're using us today or don't use us, we actually do offer a deal on some of those security metrics components. So if you're looking for an antivirus software or a scanning software, reach out to us. We can certainly get you in touch with someone that can help you out. Now with that, that's really all we have for today. We wanted to keep it very high level and get everyone back on their day, but we do have some questions. There's a bunch of them here that, which is great. I'm not sure I'll be able to get to all of those today. We'll, certainly some of those are unique and specific to certain firms, so we'll reach out to you independently. But there are a few common themes, it looks like. Several of the questions are around card encryption, which I talked about, click-to-pay options, and the information to be able to recharge cards. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, the incorporating a client payment link on your website or emailing those out, you are certainly not exposing your firm to additional security risks. I know a lot of times putting a link out seems like you're adding additional risks than keeping it close to your chest or keeping it indoors or inside for people to process payments. But again, the rule of thumb is the further away you can get yourself from being exposed to full card numbers, whether they're called in and left on a voicemail message, emailed to you, given to you over the phone and written down internally, whatever that looks like, the further you can get away from that, the better it is for both your virtual environment and your physical environment. And putting that client pay link out there actually provides that additional buffer. You're never being exposed to it. You're leveraging someone that's gone through the audits, PCI compliant, entering that data in, and you're really just receiving deposits into your bank account. And one of the nice things, and I think to answer some of these questions, I'm going to pull up just a demo environment of Client Pay, which might be valuable. Bear with me one second. So this is a back office environment of Client Pay for those of you who haven't seen it. But when a client makes a payment through the Click to Pay link, one of the cool things, so a client goes to your website, they click on a link or an email, opens up a form, they enter in some card information, client number, invoice number, we send them a receipt. But once that payment actually happens, you get a notification, and what we do is we leverage an industry practice called tokenization. So when the authorization goes down or the authorization comes back from the acquiring bank saying, hey, everything looks good, money is available, approved, we request a token or key that we store in the system saying, this is replacing that sensitive card data. We're going to store this in the system, allowing our user to recharge that card or do some maintenance on that card if needed. So very similar to if you're shopping on Amazon, if you ever had to change your card or delete your card or do some maintenance on your card, you'll notice that that card number can't be changed. It's because it doesn't reside in the system. It's not actually here. There's a token behind the system that's referencing that card. So you would never have access to it. We don't have access to it, but you have the ability to both charge that card again. So if you wanted to charge it, you could do a quick pay and just charge that card again if you needed to back office. Or what many firms will do is they'll actually charge, set up the recurring payment plan. So they'll send the link to the client saying, make your initial payment of $50, and then they'll set up a payment plan thereafter. So the card's in the system, they didn't get exposure to it, they'll go ahead and say, now you have your remaining 19 payments, or sorry, $50 a month for 19 months. So you can set up the recurring payment schedule without ever actually having access to that site, or access to the card information, or keeping that card data at the firm for whatever reason. So you can really have a true no-scope PCI solution if you're leveraging those click-to-pay links for the initial payments. So very cool. We've had, again, as I mentioned, so many firms have transitioned to that. Obviously, there's value in the click-to-pay links. Clients can pay after hours. You don't have to get them on the phone. There's obviously the aging AR component to it, but really it comes down to PCI and making sure that you're as far away from the card data as possible. We don't store any card data. We certainly don't want you storing any card data. And if the client is, and if you're putting the onus on the client to enter that information themselves, it's really the ideal solution for everyone. So that's really all I had for today. I know it was very high level. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us, and we'd be happy to chat with you on any questions you have on today's webinar, questions about PCI for your firm, what you're using today, and how that may, how we may be able to alter, change, or improve the security structure at your firm. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan, for all of that information. And as Ryan said, this concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send an email tomorrow with a link for this webinar. Please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts. Have a great day, everyone.